Hey guys, and welcome to day 6, Just a Poor Sinner. Man, I was not looking forward to today's illustrations. In fact, Crow here was the one I was most hesitant to start. While I had pretty strong concepts for Ray and Ash, I had no idea where to start for him. I couldn't decide between Pride and Wrath, so my concept ideas for him kept going back and forth. In the end, I think I settled on one that was okay at best. I still kept it pretty wrathful, but I think the Pride came through alright. Now, being honest, I did not like the sketch I ended up with. Granted, it was the best out of the bunch, but still, I didn't like it. So far, this was the only time I broke my pattern of working on the characters in the order you see them in. I actually started on Ray first and then came back to Crow later. So my idea for Crow was that his punishment was to be given these great demonic powers but be completely unable to utilize them. The power would just keep building and slowly tearing his body apart, and man, that's kinda dark. Should I be worried? Anyway, the original concept also had him surrounded by mirrors, so no matter where he looked, he'd only be able to see this great power he could never use and only watch as it slowly tore him apart. But I knew I wouldn't have time to add all of them in, so I scrapped it. This set of illustrations was actually the one that took the longest out of all the ones I've done so far, but I thought this concept could utilize both Pride and Wrath pretty well. So my main problem then was how to save this sketch that I just couldn't stand. Then I thought, well, I haven't really been challenging myself enough yet. Everything so far has been pretty standard, give or take a few factors. So I decided to flip the lighting completely and try a few things I'd never done before. And as an added challenge, I also kept myself to only one color. I could only change its tone and saturation, and that's it. Now, I did bend that roll just a tad for this one, as you'll see later. I added in some small amounts of orange and yellow in an effect you'll see at the end, as well as some lighting on the hair. I'd have to say the lighting is definitely one of the factors that saved this sketch. It actually became my favorite of today's illustrations, which really surprised me. Most of the time lighting is generally from one side or up at an angle, so it's rare I ever get the chance to really experiment, so this was really refreshing. So I have him lit from underneath from this platform he's chained to. Originally I had changed this to the mirror, but I couldn't get it to be that reflective, blurry look I was going for, so that's something I need to practice. I'm much more used to crisp reflections or slightly blurred ones, but I was going for a totally fogged mirror and I wasn't sure how to create that, especially with the fact I wanted the mirror to glow. I also avoided using the airbrush, instead using more of a dense watercolor brush and blending and blurring from there. I think I may start using this far more often. It's a pretty versatile brush and it really gives the illustration more of that traditional sort of feel. What's weird is this is what I'm pretty sure I used to use before I began to rely so heavily on the airbrush tool, and I'm not sure why I stopped using it. Something I knew I wanted to add to this picture was a little bit of a glow effect. I wanted the chains to have this sort of cursed glow to them just to add to that demonic look I was going for. So I added this lighter red behind the dark chains to make them glow a little bit. Then later I went back and added a little bit of a glow onto the chains themselves just to help them pop a little bit. It was a little bit tedious, but I think it adds a nice effect in the long run. After this though, I don't think I want to draw chains again for quite a while. Chains and pearls are definitely on my no-draw list right now. You'll see the reason for the pearls later. Something else I was excited for was the eyes. I had the idea to make the eyes all one solid color and then add this glowing pupil on top of them. I didn't want him to look too human, and I thought him having normal eyes might make him seem a bit too friendly. So I made them all solid red, and then messed around a bit with the pupil and the iris until I was happy with it. Then you could see me start to make that effect that I talked about earlier. I wanted to really try these lava cracks in the skin for quite a while, and I figured this was a pretty good opportunity. I had also just rewatched Moana, so that may have had something to do with it. Yeah, while I was working on this, I had Moana of all things playing in the background. Even when I'm not doing something Disney related, it still manages to work its way in. So, that's Crow done, and on to Ray. So for Ray, while she is a fairly innocent character, I figured the best sin I can get in for her was envy. So my concept for her was that her body was just this mist, and it's only held together by these plates. And her punishment was that she would find different plates to add onto her body, but as she added them on, the others would start to separate and fall off. And all of the plates are held together by this tiny and fine thread, so it often just break apart. And to top it off, she wouldn't be able to see what she was adding. It kept her blind, giving her these sort of mirrored eyes. I figured since it was envy I was portraying, mirrors would be pretty appropriate. And since she was blind, she wouldn't be able to tell that all the plates she was adding would all be the same. Meaning her quest to find better things to adorn herself with would be just completely empty and utterly futile. I also wanted to have this look of things being just slightly off, so I moved some of the plates around so the spacing wasn't perfectly even. Like they were all sort of moving around, but I didn't want it to be super distracting, so I kept it pretty minuscule. I think I kept them mostly focused on her head, since it wasn't attached by threads, it'd likely be moving around anyway. I also wanted to make her head look a little bit more like a mask, so I avoided any blushing or freckles, and I even painted on her eyebrows. I also gave her a much darker hair color this time to better frame her face and to avoid clashing with the light-colored mist I added, which I do later on. I didn't really want to do mist as her hair, and I didn't want too much focus on it, so I didn't do anything special with it. In my head, I was planning to do this sort of galaxy pattern for her skin, but since I had added this extra rule of only using a monochromatic color scheme last minute, I didn't do that. Using a runny watercolor brush, I kept building up the opacity of her skin, and I did it fairly unevenly to give her more of this ghostly look. I also added this blurry light blue on top to sort of imitate her actual skeleton. I thought this would be a nice way to break up all that one color of blue and make more of this mystical effect. And since part of me still wanted to do a galaxy pattern, I added some small white specks to the mist. And then using the pen tool, I went and drew some fine lines to represent those really tiny strings. Then, because I had no idea what to do with the crotch area, and I did still want her to have some form of clothing, I made this really simple sheer wrap. Not too much to talk about there, just some low opacity and some more shading. So with Ray done, we finish up today with Ash. Oh my god, what was I thinking with her? Not like in concept, I can tell you that. I have no idea why I made this one so line art heavy. So for Ash's concept, considering her backstory, greed was a pretty easy choice. My idea for her was to have her turned into the statue, kind of like Crow. She's just trapped in one single place, surrounded by what she thought she wanted. So for some reason, I decided to better represent greed, she should be made entirely of jewelry. Yep. So I kept flipping through different pictures of some old and ancient jewelry, and I took elements from them to mimic Ash's clothing. I also remembered this video from Gloom, a super awesome and totally amazing special effects makeup artist. She's just so much fun, you should really go check her out. But she made a personification of greed, and she did this sort of molten gold look on her neck. So I took that idea and I used it on Ash for her shoulder and to better cover her chest a little bit. Again, the sketches were made before I gave that color rule to myself, so I changed it to this platinum silver material last minute instead. Ash's look actually changed quite a bit from her sketch. I completely redrew her face, and I totally scrapped the idea of her torso being perched on this giant gemstone, and I'm so glad I did because I am so tired of drawing gems after this. You know what? Add that on the list of things I really do not want to draw anytime soon. I also took out some of the pearl and chain accents that you'll see later in the sketch. I was so done with chains and pearls, I was not about to make a whole sash of them. Plus, I figured since she's a statue, there really shouldn't be such a flowy object. It kind of throws things off. Now, in the concept stage, her hair was the trickiest thing. I wasn't sure how to give her hair, again, avoiding making lines of pearls and such. And then I came across this headdress that had these sort of feather-shaped pieces of metal that framed the face, and it even had these leaf pieces that stuck up and curved away from the headdress. So I took that design, I made it a bit more asymmetric, and bam, there's Ash's hair. Everything else was pretty easy. Most of the ideas I got were for Egyptian jewelry and some ornate English jewelry. Obviously you have that big Egyptian necklace covering her chest, and then I stuck some pieces of an English necklace underneath it. Then I used some Egyptian bracelets on her legs to mimic the straps she normally has on her pants. I took both an Egyptian and an English necklace and I layered them, and I used that to make her this sort of skirt, and I put some English bracelets on her feet to mimic her boots. Then I just added a buttload of pearls and gems, just way too many. While pearls are pretty easy to shade since it's just an orb, it was so annoying to go back and make sure every single one was shaded. Then there were the gems. It's been so long since I made any sort of gem. There was the pearl fan art I made a ways back, but that's just more iridescent lighting than an actual gem. The smoky quartz fan art was the most recent gem I've drawn, and I have no idea how I made that. But even if I remembered, it's too simplistic for what I wanted here, so I did my best. I had this reference picture of various gem cuts so I can try and mimic the lighting on the various faces, which was so hard. Any gem artists out there, I am sending you some serious kudos, because it is way harder than it looks. From a distance, it looks fine, but up close, I don't think the illusion works as well. I mostly used a lot of overlay, glow, and soft light layers to get that sort of gem look. This one was definitely the hardest to pull off, especially with the monochromatic color scheme. Since there were so many little pieces, it was hard keeping all the similar tones away from each other so they wouldn't get, lost in each other. This piece was so exhausting, but I'm proud of all the work I put into it. I confess the rock she's attached to is a bit meh. The texture does help, but it doesn't quite look like what I had planned. I'm so glad tomorrow's theme is a bit easier. Today really wore me out. So that wraps up today's illustrations, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for Magic of a Pure Heart. Bye for now.
I'm the fly in your suit, I'm the kettle in your shoe, I'm the bee beneath your bed, I'm the bump on every head, I'm the pillow which you slip, I'm the pin in every head, I'm the thorn in your side, makes you go and ride. And it's so easy when you're evil. This is the life you see, the devil fixes up to me. I do it all because I'm evil, and I do it all for free. Your tears are all the pay I'll ever need.